Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Hello, good afternoon. I can definitely hear you. Hi, Tuba. How are
Hello,
you doing?
sir.
You
How are
okay?
you?
Good, very
I'm
good.
good, sir. How are you?
Good, very good. Thank you. So we've also got Bamim, who's also joined the same course. So it is the two of you in
Yes,
sessions. Hi, Bamim. How are you doing? You're okay?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you. This unit, we had already started for scheduling in terms of Thursdays and Fridays. Obviously, we'll try and adjust to, weekend timings for the delivery of next unit. So it's
Okay.
yourself and we've got Dr. Tuba. She is also from Pakistan. Both of you are essentially from Pakistan, and
Yes.
we're able to chat to each other, and get to know each other as well. So
Okay.
we are looking at, because this is your first session, so you've not missed much. You'd be able to catch up on the learning outcome 1 and the unit introduction for managing people, which is essentially
Yes.
a unit.
I saw that recording already. So,
Right. Okay, that's great. So what we are
yeah.
going to do today is I had broken down the learning outcome 1 into 2 parts. One was because it was a bit of a longish session, and obviously it included unit introduction. And the part 2 of LO1 essentially, completed the discussion on all the assessment criteria for learning outcome 1. So today we are going to be discussing learning outcome 2, and we are focused on a couple of things. It's a short learning outcome with only 2 assessment criteria today. So we are looking at understanding how training and career development essentially helps in managing resources within the organization. And when we talk about the health and social care sector in general, this sector, along with, if you think of, just if you put on the creative hat and think of other sectors in which there is a lot of focus on training and development, one such other sector which comes to mind is tourism and hospitality management, which is also customer service or customer oriented. Obviously, there are lots of other sectors like financial services, but within financial services, you have, the outward facing retailing services, which is again focused on a lot of, training and development. So within each of these sectors, we look at, in general, focus on training and development is always there within the organizations because they want the staff, employees, contractors, workers, to be at the cutting edge of in terms of their skill set, and also be able to be using, technology and soft skills and hard skills and the experience they've gained over the years to be able to provide excellent service. Now, this particular learning outcome is going to discuss why is there a lot of importance placed on training and career development opportunities, and in general, why these opportunities are important for individuals which are working within the health and social care sector. So when we talk about career development and we look at just generically speaking, this particular learning outcome will ask us to focus on things like appraisals, reviews which tend to happen, observations which tend to happen, or endpoint observations which are typically done to sign off certain, say, for example, now you're okay, you're showing signs of improvement, so you sign off. And those are the bits that we are going to be looking at, how they are influenced by training and development of staff within the sector. We'll also be looking at why continuous professional development or continuous training is important as a concept within this sector. And there are 2 assessment criteria. One of them is looking at covering how do we maximize individual, group and group performance by implementing certain strategies within the organization. And these strategies would tend to be, team building strategies or strategies which are related to, say, for example, improving the standards of care, following the policies and processes in order to ensure compliance, and the base part of, in terms of the quality part of it, does not slip within when we are providing services. So here a nurse might be providing care services to a patient who has had an operation in the ICU. Again, some of the key aspects of this would be that if the nurses undergo, whether it's male or female, whatever nurses, they undergo regular training, then they are able to provide services or essential support services for the patient to recover in an aspect which is meeting not just the compliance side of things, but also the quality standards which are set within a hospital or within a setup. And last but not the least, also looking at abiding by ethical issues, which would be required in general for a nurse to be able to, follow. Now, there are loads and loads of types, or when I say loads, I mean by that variety of training and development programs which organizations run. We look at covering a few in order to understand why they are important. And, in general, sometimes organizations also apply to get certain accreditations. And when we look at accreditations, that means they try and get a seal of approval. So sometimes the word that I've highlighted here talks about investing in people, which is IIP. It's a worldwide, globally acclaimed, certification or an accreditation which organization apply for. And there are 3 levels of accreditation in that: bronze, silver, and gold. And there's another one. There are loads of them. And I'm pretty sure that most of you have heard about the ISO certification, which tends to be, initially originated for engineering and, engineering companies in general. But now there are different types of ISO certifications available. Some of them are basically, for documentation. Some of them are for quality, and some of them are in general, certifications which basically highlight that the quality standards in the organization are meeting a certain stringent requirement for which they have applied. There are others, Matrix. There is a CARE certification, which is offered by CQC in the UK. There is Matrix certification, which a lot of organizations have. So there are loads of them, but what we are going to do is cover 1 or 2 just to understand why they are important, and they are useful for organizations to prove and build reputation and a brand in the market that they follow certain market or leading organizational standards. And IIP is one of them, and that allows the organizations to ensure that all of the employees working within the organization are trained. They undergo regular training. It's not just that once you join the company, you were trained once, but every year you undergo training and you're maintaining certain thresholds which are required to maintain those service standards. And those are standards which are inspected by organizations like IIP, ISO, Matrix, CQC, and they would then, award, say, for example, a certain layer or tier of accreditation, and that would emphasize that the hospital is very good, or the care services are very good, or they are turnaround times are very good, or are within the criteria set by the government or legislation. And those are the bits that we're going to be looking at covering in today's learning outcome. So understand the role of training and development in regards to health and social care sector is what we are going to be focused on for discussing today. Now, as always, we look at some part of this discussion through a PowerPoint presentation. I've got a few slides that I've prepared, and what I would want to do is basically cover the indicative content which has been asked for, so that we have a very good understanding of what is being discussed today as far as understanding of training and career development opportunities are concerned within the health and social care sector. Now, feel free to ask me any questions. You can unmute your mic when you want to do that, or you can ask me questions through the chat room. So let this session be interactive, and obviously, if you have any queries, questions, do feel free to ask. Now, the first part that I would like to cover is understand, what is training and what is development. So if I have to look at, just breaking it down to the very basic, because these are 2 terms which are going to be repeated time and again in the assessment criteria and in the discussion for learning outcome 2. So when we sometimes talk about training or definition of training, the definition of training tends to be a process of increasing, knowledge and skills, which the organization would do or want essentially for their employees, so that they are able to do a particular job or a job role which has been assigned to them effectively. It also looks at, if I put it this way, training is also sometimes done that you are requiring to acquire new skills. You're requiring to acquire knowledge. And in those cases, in order for you to learn, there are various ways of learning. Obviously, when we talk about learning and knowledge, there are various ways of learning. One could be that you learn from experience, you learn academically by studying a qualification. You also learn vocationally by studying, but also practically implementing and doing practicals. So there are various ways through which humans learn. But generally speaking, when we talk about learning in general, we talk about sometimes this being facilitated through the route of, I would say, training and development within the organization. Because although, let's face it, time, cost, and quality is a triangle always within the organization. So how much time will it take if you acquire the skill over your own by self-development, by self-learning, or self-managed learning? And that could be through experience over a period of number of months or weeks or years. But the organizations would typically want this training to be imparted to individuals working or taking up a particular role in a quicker and a prompt fashion or manner. So in those cases, the organization would then organize what are called training events or training seminars, and they would then be useful for you to go through them and then acquire it. So it's the acquisition of skills, knowledge, and obviously things that you are going to let's say put into practice in terms of doing your day-to-day responsibilities. Now, if I talk about development tends to be a longer-term process. So training is something wherein, if I have to, let's give you a basic example. If I want to learn how to ride a bike, I might need some coaching or some training essentially to understand how it works, the mechanism, and then try it out. And that would be practical led, because I'll have to try it out physically myself to be able to get onto a bike. I'll fall a number of times, but at some stage I'll try and maintain my balance, understand that this is how I would need to maintain my balance, and I would start riding. It could happen within an hour, half a day, 1 day, 3 days, even a month, depending on how much time do you put in. So similarly, when you look at development, and if I say, how is development different from training? Development tends to be a process which is going to be a continuous process. Training would be you're learning to ride a bike, right? But development would be a different example of that, would be that you're learning to drive different types of vehicles. So you might learn to drive a car, you might learn to drive a truck, you might learn to drive a Formula One car or different types. So you might get training on one to learn and understand how driving as a concept works. You start driving it, but over a point in time, if you just, this is literal example, not related to healthcare, but I'll give you one, but just as an example to understand the difference between the two terms, you might then want to drive, say, for example, you want to drive a camper van because you want to go on a holiday with your family. But that camper van obviously is different from driving a car. And in some cases, you might need to acquire a license for it, like in the UK and European countries. And in those cases, you would need some training again. Although you know driving, but you're looking at continuous processes of training, and that would be termed as development. So it's a process that creates different, or allows you to, let's say, acquire different skills. And they might be skills driving a car, driving a motorbike, driving a truck, driving a camper van. And that is a process which is what I will say development. Sometimes, if I look at development, in the context of health and social care, for example, then, development would mean that you're improving, say, for example, turnaround times. Development would mean that at some stage, if, for example, the hospital has a number of deaths because of, let's say, an example, maternity deaths during the time of birth, a lot of deaths have happened over the years, and this has been picked up as a corrective action project by the hospital and the management. What they would do is put a developmental plan in place, which would look at identifying the reasons at the first stage, look at mitigating the risks, look at training the individuals who are involved in that process, and then ensuring equipment, technology, best doctors, and other bits are available, so that this, as a process, when it is run in this fashion over a period of time, would allow the birth rates to improve and fatality rates to go down. And that would be seen as a process of development. Now, here the management might put certain milestones that, okay, in the first 3 months, we need to be able to achieve training and ensure that all the people are aware of certain aspects of what they're getting involved. Maybe a team will be formed, but after 3 months, there's another milestone, and at the end of the year, maybe just hypothetically speaking, a timeline would be put, and this timeline would get completed when these milestones are completed. And that is where the process of development would come in. So here, it will be a continuous process. It will be a process which will be documented by, achieving of milestones. And in some cases, this process would also involve multiple or different types of people from different departments being involved in order to ensure the end goal or the objectives which have been set. So, and the other critical difference between training and development would be that there are benchmarks which are going to be set against which this development is going to be measured. So it can't be that you let the process run for 6 months or 1 year and it runs the whole time frame and then you find out there is no improvement. No. So again, during the process of development, there are going to be milestones, and these benchmarks which will be put in at certain stages will need to be met in order to ensure that there's progress happening within the organization or within that particular process. And that is where development comes in. So slightly different when we look at the process of training and development. Training tends to be time-bound, maybe objective-led, goal-led, but development tends to be a continuous process. It is over a longer duration, and it tends to be a process wherein results are measured at intervals, and milestones have to be met in order to ensure that the organization is moving towards or showing improvements and moving towards achieving those objectives. Now, if I have to summarize, look at certain types of trainings. Trainings can be of different types. You have trainings which could be on-job training. So sometimes when you become a nurse or you become a health and social care worker, doctors, junior doctors, when they complete their MBBS degree, they then are put on training for about 18 months or 2 years in the UK, and they would undergo and work within a hospital or within a particular setup, and that would involve on-job training. That means they're working, they're medically qualified, but at the same time, they're practicing to be able to gain practical experience and become fully qualified as a doctor. Formal education, obviously academic education that you pursue, is a process of training from the time the child is born until the time you graduate from your school or university. You are in the formal process of training and you gain academic qualifications. Trainings normally in organizations are organized through workshops and seminars. There could be portals which the organization have. Sometimes these portals could be, training portals, and they set it up and it is then monitored through the department heads or, the HR, and they are requested, employees are expected essentially to be able to complete some of these trainings, annual trainings, in order to ensure that they're meeting the required, criteria which are set as per their job description. Sometimes you would see large events which organizations organize, and that would be for a number of people. So in those cases, annual events, conferences, which you normally go to, would also be classed as training events, because that is where an external trainer or maybe the lead management team comes in and addresses and trains employees across the board, and they would generally be large events, networking events, or annual events which the organization holds. Coaching and mentoring, there's a lot of difference between coaching and mentoring, but is an essential process through which development can happen. And sometimes if you've come across this word called talent planning or succession planning, which normally tends to be a key word when we look at management, and if people are stepping into senior positions in management, like a clinical director, the head of the medical affairs, or the director of PR, or for example, the director of pharmacy, or surgeon, people who are going to be leading the medics, for example, director of surgery, things like that in a hospital. What you'll generally see, there is a lot of mentoring which tends to happen with colleagues which are leaving or stepping out of that role and somebody stepping into that role. It involves coaching, and that tends to be a one-on-one or one-to-many process. So mentoring tends to be one-on-one, one of the essential difference. Coaching tends to be one-to-many. You could have a literal example that I would give here is, if you look at a football manager coaches a team of 11, or essentially a team of 11 which plays. cricket manager essentially coaches a team of 11 which play, but there are 24 people in the team which he manages. So coaching tends to be broad-based, mentoring tends to be on a one-on-one or a focus-based with one individual. For example, if somebody is looking at stepping into the role of a senior or a clinical director for a hospital, then in those cases, you would generally see the process of mentoring starting for a period of 6 months, 12 months, 18 months before the experienced person is stepping out or moving out of the role and somebody is stepping into his or her shoes. They would be undergoing that process wherein they'll shadow the person and closely follow and understand the skills required, best practices they will adopt, and that would be the process of mentoring. Cross trainings, job rotations typically tend to be a norm of the day-to-day because people obviously are rotated within their roles. They're given opportunities to work within organization, work in different roles within organization, and that is another way of training somebody to be able to understand how the department works. A simple example that I would give you here is a head nurse in a hospital would typically become a head nurse after 8 to 10 years of experience because she has been through lots of other work roles that she has done within the hospital, maybe working within the ICU, a general ward, looking at working with doctors when they are doing surgery. But over a point in time, they understand all the sides of the processes. And then at that stage, they are basically being put it through what is called job rotation, but at a stage when, because they have good understanding of all the different types of roles the nurses are required to do, they might be then promoted and to a head nurse. And in those cases, you see an example of job rotation happening. People sometimes do professional certifications, and these are examples of, how you would look at essentially, let's put it this way, achieving certain skills, and they would be part and parcel of understanding, let's say, part and parcel of how you would basically acquire, skills required for within a workplace. I'm going to play a quick short video. This video basically summarizes, or in a way, tells us what is career professional development, or CPD. Now, in most cases, I think you would be aware that when we talk about development, we talk about development from a point of view of, personal development. And when we talk about personal development, what tends to happen is that you may have a work plan, or you might have a plan, and that might be called a personal development plan. You monitor it, you review it, you update it for the activities and the goals that you complete, you keep it yourself. But at some stage, if this plan is to be reviewed by your manager or by the company or the organization, then the version of this plan which is maintained and reviewed and even updated by you and your manager for appraisal purposes or for growth and development purposes would then be called what is called a career professional development plan, because you're looking at growing in your job, you're looking at growing in your job role, and essentially here is where the professional development comes in within an organization. So let's listen into this particular video, a short video of about a minute and a half, for us to be able to understand what is career professional development.
CIPD has over 140,000 members across the globe working together to champion better work and working lives. Continuing professional development is a fundamental.
So this particular video which I'm playing is actually developed by CIPD. CIPD is a chartered body in the UK, and you can subscribe to this organization for the purposes of professional development. Now, there are different chartered bodies in different areas, but obviously this is one of them which basically is recognized globally. And if you have a membership and you regularly attend CIPD events, then obviously you get an access to a portal, and that allows you to follow various activities, articles, for networking and various opportunities to be able to develop your career.
As a part of our membership and our purpose. In the ever-changing world of work, we need to be agile and respond swiftly to challenges. Through CPD, we build up and maintain our knowledge and expertise, apply insights to add value to our organizations, and uphold the high standards of our profession. CPD isn't about the number of hours you clock up or a tick box exercise. It's about investing in yourself and managing your own learning and growth, ensuring relevance in the present and preparing for the future. From seminars and podcasts to community work and networking, CPD helps build professional confidence and supports you throughout your career. With the CPD cycle, you can structure your CPD in a way that's best for you, from self-assessment and planning your development to your learning activities and reflective practice. The CPD cycle helps you to create impact in the work you do. At each stage, you'll find a range of practical tools and resources to support you on your way to suit your interests and your needs.
Now, this is generally in place within most organizations. And that is how they would, when I say managing people, that is how HR, your manager, your department head would be essentially planning your career development within the organization. Now, let's look at another short video, which basically talks about what is the requirement of CPD and what does it count? What are the activities within the health and social care sector, which nurses, healthcare workers, practice managers, therapists, occupational therapists, or anybody working within the sector actually does. So let's listen into this particular video from the NHS.
Exception to what I wanted to make, and I didn't find the platform that did that.
This is a video by the Healthcare Professional Council at CPC, and they describe what kind of activities that you do within this sector count as CPD activities, whether you are a practitioner, podiatrist, therapist, doctor, nurse, health and social care worker. You have a membership of this particular body, which most people have, and they would essentially follow and abide by the guidelines given so that at the end of the year, you're able to maintain your membership and obviously do activities or participate in those kind of activities, which will count towards your career professional development.
I always say, especially to ODPs and also other allied health professionals, is that HCPC do not look at the quantity of hours that you've done, they look at the quality. You need to make sure that you've got very good, substantive, wide range of CPD activities that you've been engaging in as well. And that's really important to just log it, not just to wait until the letter comes near when your registration is renewing.
I think people always believe it has to be about academic side of things. And there is an element of academia because you have to maintain professional standards. But at the same time, I think a lot of it is about raising your awareness and knowledge and getting a very lateral view and a holistic view of everything that's around you. So being able to present your CPD in different ways. So to not only just to read the literature, but to communicate with others, to attend conferences and be more aware of products maybe on the market, new ideas. And to be involved. I think that's all CPD.
And also the different types of developments. It's not just about attending a course. You can read something, you can have a chat with somebody, you can have a situation where you've reflected on, you can do sort of simulation, they can also do bite-sized teaching as well, because we're so limited with time. So it's not just about learning, it's also about giving back as well.
Like for the type of CPD where you're actively learning and participating in something and then carrying that back to real life, to the ward or to the OT team in general. So things like conferences or learning courses, or even having experience with a patient and then reflecting on that and discussing that within our team, or something where we learn something, we all go off and do it with our patients around the ward and come back and reflect on it and evaluate what happened or how we're using treatment or an assessment. So we very much that kind of proactive learning and reflection rather than just reflection. But reflection obviously is very important as well, but I would prefer more proactive, active learning kind of CPD and chat.
And someone's actually enjoyed this attending the course. So it's all well and good that you're delivering it, but it's also good to attend courses to get information as well. So it's all different things, journals. I'm just about to have a chapter published in a medical book. So, and that was a big challenge, like doing lots of reading and research and then making it into a chapter that somebody will potentially be referencing. And on the HCPC, the website, and on the CPD list, it gives you such a wide range of activities that you don't even appreciate that is actually CPD, and it is CPD, even watching TV programs, things like that as well. So it's a fantastic resource to use.
It's amazing how quickly your CPD actually goes up. If you're regularly attending things or regularly discussing, whether you're having supervision sessions, mentoring sessions, you're reading literature, all of these things I put down, and however minor they seem to you, they actually, it's a learning point and a learning curve in your journey. So I record everything, and I'm always amazed at how much I've learned and how much I'm progressing.
As you can see from this video, basically talks about why there is an importance of CPD from a podiatrist, from an occupational therapist, and from a let's say a nurse's perspective. Now let's get back to, so this gives you a bit of a bird's eye view in terms of why it is important specifically within this sector that we need to look at obviously focusing on training and development. Now, with this background in mind, let's look at understanding some of the assessment criteria which are important for us to cover this learning outcome. Now, the first one talks about explain how to maximize individual and group performance by implementing certain performance management solutions. Now, one of the terms that you will come across in general would be term called performance management. Now, when I talk about performance management, this is one of the key criteria which most managers have. That means they have supervisory responsibility. They are managing staff, employees, contractors, or people who work on contractual roles in the NHS and specifically in the UK. And their main aim is to manage them in a way wherein they are able to get the objectives and the goals fulfilled for which they have been employed for. So when we talk about the term performance management, it generally tends to be a tool which will be used by managers to, let's say, both at the operational level and also at the strategic level. So when I say operational level would be somebody who's using this or using some of the tools in performance management. We'll come to the tools, but they are using it to increase efficiency or increase productivity of their staff on a day-to-day basis in carrying out day-to-day activities. At the strategic level, it is going to be something which the management or the chief HR person or maybe the head of the department would get into once a year. And this would require planning to be done to ensure that, okay, we've got staff at this level of training, we've got staff at this level of competency, or we've got staff at contributing to this much productivity level in the organization. How do I increase that level from A to B or take it from B to C? And that is what the strategic level of performance management would mean. And in those cases, the management or the organization would need to put in additional tools, techniques, maybe spend or set aside budgets to be able to do additional training, external training, or maybe even hire external trainers to be able to bring that facet which is required within their team in order to increase productivity or in order to increase performance or efficiency within their team. Now, performance management is used generally as a tool to set goals and monitor those goals for individuals as well as groups of people working within a team, and how they contribute towards the organizational achievement of the organizational objectives. So here, performance management tends to be like a systematic process which will be looking at aligning some of the activities which the individual would be required to undertake. And these activities would widely align with the, when I say widely align, I mean, they will align generally with the wider organizational goals. And here, this, when I talk about this, when I say this, I mean performance management techniques, PMT, things like management by objective, performance appraisal, 360-degree feedback, balanced scorecard, various different types of techniques would be then used as tools by managers to do an audit to say whether whether this is working, whether the individual is working to, say, for example, the set criteria. And in some cases, things like feedback surveys, exit interviews, redefining job descriptions, and making the selection process more stringent would ensure that only the best of the best actually get recruited within the organization. Now, performance management is very important, specifically both in private and public sector, big and small organizations, because it is also associated with rewards which the person, the management, or a team or a department can get at the end of the year because they fulfill those objectives. A simple example that I would give you here would be if a hospital is trying to improve, let's say, rates of any sort of, so if I give you a very specific example, say a hospital is trying to, during the COVID pandemic, the hospital was trying to drive away a lot of patients and only taking in patients which were seriously ill, had signs of pneumonia, and obviously needed the the oxygenator, or basically intensive care to be able to recover from COVID. Now, in terms of turnaround times, if we look at, if a hospital is looking at improving the turnaround times, freeing up a number of beds, then what will happen is that at some stage, the management from a long-term perspective will look at putting a strategy in place and look at, job descriptions very carefully. And they would look at incorporating what are called organizational goals to free up hospital bed capacity, or, ensure that patients go home, let's say, get discharged and go home as soon as they're recovered. And in those cases, they would look at reducing the turnaround times or wait times in this case, for patients who are on the queuing list or on the queue list. So in this case, a performance management, plan would be put into place, and different people at different levels, depending on their hierarchy within the organization, would be given different targets. Now, in order to evaluate those targets and see whether it's working, not working, the management here would put into place what are called PMTs, performance management techniques. So for the management, because objectives are being looked at qualitatively, they would be evaluated using setting qualitative objectives. So at the end of 6 months, the first review should see you achieving a decrease of 5% on this turnaround time. And if that objective is met, then the management would be in line, or the person would be in line to get maybe certain rewards or, financial rewards. And that would be termed as management by objective. In some cases, frontline staff would be trained, and obviously they would be asked to fulfill certain job roles, and they would be required to meet or complete day-to-day activities. And in those cases, it could simply mean taking a half a day off, or maybe giving them some sort of a financial reward, or maybe they're qualifying for a bonus at the end of the year. And that would mean, managing the staff from a point of view of rewards and incentives. So when we look at maximizing the performance of individuals or group of individuals or teams within a particular setup, PMT techniques typically tend to come in quite handy. Now, there are various ways through which we can improve performance of individuals and people or group of people working within a team and within a particular setup. Some of them I've highlighted, obviously in this slide. So one of them tends to be, if everybody sings from the same songbook, that means there are very clear goals and expectations set, and they are very clearly defined in the job description. This leaves no ambiguity or nothing open to interpretation, and that is where you would generally see that your employees, your staff would be working to the highest possible level of productivity, because there is no ambiguity or no, let's say, instructions which are open to interpretation. And that is where communication comes in. You have set very clear goals, you have set very clear expectations, and that tends to work brilliantly well in most cases. Then we look at regular performance feedback. This is where managers typically take feedback from their employees on a monthly basis, on a weekly meeting basis, on a quarterly basis. And in some departments, some organizations, specifically like health and social care, and when you look at tourism and hospitality management, you get feedback pretty much almost on a daily basis. If a patient gets discharged, they're given a questionnaire, and the questionnaire directly reflects on what kind of support, that's it. Basically, the duties which have been performed by the team would get evaluated pretty much straight away. And in those cases, you get feedback coming in from a simple aspect like a questionnaire which is collected from the patient. You would have performance appraisals, which typically happen annually, once a year in most organizations, and they will tend to look at goals and your progress that you made towards those goals. How has your overall performance been throughout the year? Then if they feel, when I say if they feel, I mean the management or your manager feels that there are some areas in which you have been lacking and obviously you need training and development, that is where the PDP or the CPD plan comes in. And there are development plans put in place to say, okay, it'll be good for you to get onto this particular training, or it'll be good for you to, improve your skills in this area. And that is where I would recommend, these trainings for you. And that would be, something that you'll have to get on with within the organization. Now, if everything is going well, obviously we look at rewards and recognition. We look at, in some cases, these rewards and recognitions can be financial rewards, can be promotional or hierarchical rewards. And in some cases, they could be rewards which are related to even stepping into management or maybe getting a larger responsibility. But some of the other advantages of, looking at, let's put it this way, how do we maximize, productivity and obviously, individual performance within an organization, they would tend to be, through doing team building exercises, training, and obviously looking at carefully measuring performance by setting clear performance indicators and benchmarks. There are some areas in which you would also look at coaching and mentoring happening. For example, in some cases, sometimes you cannot be given or asked to get into a training event, or training cannot be conducted on a mass basis. So in those circumstances, what tends to happen is, if you're being coached or trained onto a particular type of role, then, or a particular function within a role, then in those cases, that could also take the aspect of one-on-one training, and that could be through the process of coaching and mentoring. And then a lot of organizations, specifically like the NHS in the UK, have a lot of employer engagement initiatives, which are annual events, social gatherings, and feedback processes or mechanisms wherein there's a feedback box in the office or in the organization, and you're happy to drop in a suggestion or a feedback for the management to look into. And those are other ways through which organizations would engage with the employee in order to get suggestions of how performance can be maximized within the organization and for the individual. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay. The second assessment criteria that we look at is talking about.
Sir, I wanted to ask something.
Go on.
Earlier, you mentioned that junior doctors in UK get to practice for almost 2 years after their MBBS, or you can say whatever degree, medical doctorate that is.
Yes.
So in that course of time, do they practice as an additional men to doctors or assistants, you can say, or they're allowed to practice on patients openly?
In terms of, when you look at junior doctors in the UK and their training process, basically, in the UK, the degree is a 3-year degree. So they will do a BSc in medicine. After that, they will do 2 years, after the completion of the medicine degree, they will get into what is called a 2-year foundation program. And in this foundation program, this is treated as what is called a medical training program. And they normally would work within hospitals. They'll be, obviously, they will have their title as a doctor, but they'll be basically working as, let's put it this way, they'll be working as what is called, I would say they will be working as what are called junior doctors, and they would begin their journey by looking at, completing the 3 years degree, and then essentially after that going into what is called a 2-year foundation program. And that foundation program will actually be run within a hospital setup. So they'll get assigned to a hospital or a trust or a care provider, and depending on what specialization they are doing or how they are looking at going further, they would then be assigned to do this foundation training, which tends to be after they have finished the 3 years in the medical school. And this foundation training then can lead to a specialty training, where they can apply to, say, for example, if I want to become a surgeon, or I want to become a GP, or I want to become a gynecologist or an orthodontist, whatever, they would then get into specialty training as well. And then after they've completed the 5 years, they will obviously be, this 2-year training tends to be a doctor training, on-job training. And once they've done it, then become a GP or, essentially a doctor, and then assigned to a particular role if they apply and stay within the NHS.
Okay, sir. So are they allowed to do procedures on their own or with a team?
No, that will be supervised by the team. They are also under training, but they'll be supervised by an experienced doctor or somebody who's a consultant in that area, and they would then, supervise that. So, for example, junior doctors might not, they would be part and parcel of what is called accident and emergencies, because they get to see a lot of patients, different situations. But when it comes to operative procedures, people who have applied for specialty training would be given preference, and they would go into that. But some of the others who are basically training towards becoming a general practitioner or a GP, as we say here, they would not be, looking at doing those procedures. So various training pathways would be put into place in the 2 years that they do this training
sir.
program, and that is dependent on which how they will, basically do it. But they'll be termed as doctors. They'll be getting a junior doctor salary. They'll be doing things on their own. They'll be flying solo. That is not to say that they will be always supervised. They will be carrying out functions of a doctor, which a junior doctor would do, or a doctor in training would do, essentially, and that would be
Okay, sir. That's great.
path going forward. No worries. Now, the second assessment criteria, looking at, career development and lifelong learning opportunities. So here, what we are looking at is understanding how career development happens in general. If I look at, career development within health and social care, what would it look like in terms of, if I have to mention this particular term, and then the other would be, what is lifelong learning? So when we talk about lifelong learning, there are various concepts through which an individual learns. And when we look at lifelong learning, a lot of, stress is put on something called opportunities, which will allow people to grow within their job roles or careers. And sometimes when you look at lifelong learning, these are associated with your career growth. They are associated with diverse learning methods. And in some cases, you'll also be looking at managing your learning yourself. And that is where it will be called SML, or self-managed learning. And self-managed learning would be that you're learning, say, you're doing your own research. And in those cases, it will be, to get to a particular, say, for example, you are trying to be an expert in a particular field and you're training towards that, but that training would require a lot of research and number of hours to be put into place. It is not something that you will achieve over time, or in short, it will require a lot of time. And in those cases, that concept will be termed as what is called self-managed learning. Now, when I talk about career development in health and social care would be one of the ways through which you develop and take up senior roles within the organization or within your specific job ladder that you are working within. And here, continuous professional development is important because of the fact that you would need to update your skills and your knowledge from time to time, and that would be required to provide best care, integrated care, ensuring compliance, legislation, and ethical side of things that you are being able to comply with, because the standards have changed or if the regulation have changed. And in those cases, this would be a process that would be continuous. Now, when we talk about, let's say, career development could be that you might want to pursue different opportunities. And that is where you would want to, you might have started off as a healthcare worker, but after a number of years of working, you want to develop your skills and knowledge and become a nurse. After, sometimes it does not happen, but I'm just generally speaking that people would decide to, go into a specialist area within nursing. So nursing is a generic area, but if I say people want to go into adult nursing, children nursing, nursing with disabled people or vulnerable adults, nursing for young people or children in particular, and these are various areas of nursing. So you might decide after putting in a number of years of work experience that I would want to specialize or, go into a particular career path, and that would happen primarily through career development. Now here, your managers or the organization and the setup that you work within may have opportunities that would be provided to you because you are able to go into that particular field. If not, then sometimes people leave the organization and pursue opportunities elsewhere. And that is because they're looking at progressing into diverse career pathways. And that would require them to get a good idea of different job roles which are available, within the health and social care sector. We can also look at, let's say, career development opportunities by looking at continuous learning, or looking at, when I say continuous learning, what I would also then do is look at senior roles. For example, I want to become a team leader, or when I say I'm a team leader, I'm the head nurse. I want to become a consultant doctor. That means I'm a GP already, but what I want to do is become a consultant or a specialist in substance misuse, or, for example, take up and become a lead surgeon, become a cardiologist, or become a consultant within even cardiology, which would mean that you are an expert in all forms of, cardiology, whether it's related to, valves replacement, angioplasty, looking at open heart surgery or bypass surgery, you are an expert in that. And what you're looking at doing is pursuing those diverse, career options to become a consultant at some stage. And that would be by following through on a number of professional development programs. In some cases, you might need to do additional courses. You might do some, maybe gain an academic degree or a further qualification, and they would then allow you to progress into, say, the role of a consultant. So, a GP or a doctor would be the entry-level role, but if you specialize in, go into specialty training and then become qualified, then you would basically be looking at undertaking what is called professional development, and this could be taken to the route of an academic route, in some cases professional training, and in some cases it could be continuous learning. Continuous learning, just to give you an example, would be a case wherein, for example, you have been a doctor for 20 years, and now what you want to do is take a different role, which is a role that you want to basically look at teaching medicine. So in those cases, you might have a lot of experience that you've gained over the 20 years, and what you want to do is put that experience now to teaching role side of things, in terms of teaching in a medical school, or let's say teaching, or basically working as a you still continue to work as a doctor, but you do a lot of guest seminars, or do guest speak keynotes or speeches, and that is where you're looking at spreading your knowledge and your information that you have achieved, or the experience that you've achieved. You would want to spread that knowledge. In those cases, sometimes people would get associated with advancements in medical technology. They would look at taking up, early treatment procedures, or they will be volunteering to look at taking up procedures which would be looking at developing best practices in a particular sector. And that would require not just working within their sector alone, but a lot of research work being done in order to, let's look at understanding the competencies required, the nuances of the work which is required, or the surgery which is required. And in those cases, that would be termed as continuous learning. It could be academic based. Most learnings in the health and social care sector tends to be evidence based. And as you would see, evidence based would be an example when we looked at the COVID vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna coming out with the first vaccine, and I look at evidence-based care and evidence-based learning. What essentially they did was they isolated the genome of the virus, and once the genome was isolated, it was tested. It went through a series of phases of testing on mice, on monkeys, obviously mammals, and then a last batch of 30,000 volunteers, which basically tested the vaccine, because they had to study whether there are any side effects or any sort of symptoms which the patients can get in different age groups, from as young as 8 to 60, 65 and above. And that process through which the vaccine went through before the approval was granted by FDA and MHRA in the UK, that was evidence-based testing which the vaccine went through. And in those cases, you would generally see that some of these programs lead to what is requirement of what is called continuous research and continuous learning, adapting, readapting, changing, and then finally, doing again testing on various different types of elements to be able to say that this is now safe for mass production, and that would require the process of continuous learning. Continuous learning is also happening in the case of the COVID virus. Currently, it is not in the news, but there were lots of variants which came out. There was continuously research being done, and obviously different genomes of different variants were being studied in order to ensure that the vaccination is adaptable and is able to control the spread of this particular virus, which was a global pandemic. There are other areas through which you look at career development opportunities, which is specialization. So as I give you an example of how a doctor would look at specializing into, say, a particular field, and after a number of years, you would generally see cardiologists moving into a particular area wherein they would feel that bypass is a procedure that they're able to do quite well, or they know all the complications of the procedure. They might, within cardiology, there might be specialist surgeons which work on different types. of surgery. Surgeon would be somebody who's a specialist, but within surgeons, you'll have sometimes when cardiac surgery is done, there will be cardiac surgeons available, and anesthesists would be available, and a team of doctors which will essentially be available to help the patient go through that procedure, smoothly. And in those cases, you would see specialization and advancements happening, because people have not just relied on their academic competence, not just in terms of experience and the knowledge that they've gained over the years by working, but they've also further studied and further done research to be able to offer what is called the specialist surgery. And obviously, people who have specialized, they would be looking at higher salaries, they would be predominantly looking at better growth opportunities or career opportunities. And in some cases, you see, again, going back to that same example, somebody who's been a surgeon for 20 years, has a very good track record, would move into, within an organization, step into a promotion and become the head of the department. And that would be a way of the organization rewarding the person by looking at managing the career growth opportunities for that individual to keep that individual within the trust of that hospital. So there are various ways that you can look at career development and lifelong learning, and those are what I have listed on the slide here, and each of them can be discussed in context to what particular opportunity or what particular individual within an organizational hierarchy we are looking at. And sometimes you would see the doctors with 30-35 years of experience then go and become the trustee of a hospital, or they progress and they become a chairman of the hospital, or take up the most senior position in terms of leadership within the organization. And that is achieved because they have a high degree of experience, their reputation, and over the years they have set a very good track record, and that helps them to achieve those senior positions or step into those senior roles within the organization. So overall, when we look at the concept of the career growth opportunities and obviously career development within the health and social care sector, what we are looking at is understanding that this can be managed. This is programmatically managed by department heads, by managers within the organization, and this is done in order to ensure that the individuals are able to grow in their role, are able to meet the requirements which are set in their job description, and are also able to meaningfully contribute towards the organizational objectives which are set from a point of view of their growth and organization's growth. Any questions on this so far?
No, sir. No questions.
No, sir.
Are we done with these lectures, or we're about to proceed with something else?
No, that's it. We have completed today's discussion. And what I'm going to do is put some information primarily on, which is basically focused on, the concept of, investor in people, which is primarily an organization or an accreditation, which sometimes organizations look at. And they are basically, to achieve, say, a seal of quality or some sort of a reputation to say that this is an organization which has achieved this particular accreditation, and this allows the organization to advertise and obviously say that their workforce is continuously being trained and developed in order to provide high levels of service to their customers. So this particular accreditation, which is normally what we call investor in people, is a standard for managing people within the organization, and it's an organization or a setup which was initially done in the UK. So as a company, as a let's say, and as an accreditation body, it was set up in 1991, and they have, as we say, 3 different forms of accreditation which people applied or organizations apply to get, which is bronze, silver, and gold, and they signify the various standards which the organization has in terms of providing customer service or setting customer service benchmarks while delivering services to their customers. It could be NHS, it could be in general any organization which is a business or a registered business or an organization which provides services to the members of public or people within a particular location.
Okay, sir.
Right. Any questions on apart from this? Any questions on today's session?
No, sir.
sir.
Thank you. Sir, but I had a question apart from this actually. I've been doing some self-study because the presentations are pretty to the point and they're actually quite good. So I was doing some self-study on the research methods